Now, Spider-Man 3 is widely known as being the worst of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, and this usually comes down to many reasons, ranging from executive meddling to some rather strange creative choices. But nothing got more backlash than the movie's main villain, Venom, did, and especially the way Topher Grace played Eddie Brock, with one of his most hated scenes being his last, where he jumps back into the symbiote despite the fact that Peter had just thrown a bomb into it. Now, this has sparked fierce debate among fans, mainly because they've argued that he hadn't been bonded to the symbiote long enough for him to be so willing to risk his life trying to save it. However, I believe that Brock's final act, as well as the general portrayal of Venom, actually has a hidden layer of brilliance to it. But before I get started, I want to give my usual warning that there will be even more spoilers ahead for this movie. So, in case you don't want anything else ruined, I highly suggest you click off the video and come back later. You have been warned. Now, the obvious question to ask here is, why did Brock jump back into the symbiote despite knowing full well that he could die? And if we're being perfectly honest, it's because in the original cut of the movie, the symbiote itself killed Eddie because he was bonded to it for too long. But test audiences found that too disturbing. So Sam Raimi had to figure out another way to kill him without Spider-Man directly doing it, and that was the best he could come up with. And considering his intense dislike of the character, it was probably very easy for him to make Brock look like a complete idiot in his final moments. But the question still remains, within the context of the movie, does it make sense that he would actually rebond with the symbiote at the risk of death? And to that, I have to say yes. Because the first thing to keep in mind here is, Raimi wrote the symbiote to be like a hard, really intense drug, not like the mental influencer it was in the comics that would directly speak to people. And this is rather obvious in the movie itself, considering how many times Peter says he feels great while bonded to it, and even tries to warn Eddie that while it feels really good, he'll lose himself to it if he doesn't take it off. And what makes it even worse is that this drug amplifies every single negative aspect of your personality. So not only does it give you probably a high stronger than you could ever imagine, but it compels you to act like a jerk at best and do horrible things at worst. Now, the obvious difference here is that Peter Parker is a good man at heart who's finally able to reject the symbiote when he realizes what it's turning him into. And though obviously the massive high and good feeling it gives him is gone afterwards, he actually seems to be relieved that it's over and has no desire to put it back on. In other words, he's able to see past the superficial pleasure it gives him and knows that being a good person is more important than a feeling of self-gratification at the cost of his morals. But what about Eddie Brock? Think about it. This man is a complete jerk from the first time you see him. The world revolves entirely around old Eddie Brock Jr. as far as he's concerned, and he doesn't care what he has to do to get what he believes is owed to him. Now, I know many hated this portrayal of the character, but personally, I think he works as a great contrast to Peter Parker, as well as make him stand out as the only villain in the trilogy with no redeeming qualities. And keeping that in mind, when he's at his lowest point, brought on because of his own doing, what does he do? Does he go on a journey of self reflection? No. Does he admit to himself that maybe he should be a better person? No. Instead, he blames all his problems on somebody else, to the point that he actually prays to God to kill Peter Parker. That's how self-absorbed and entitled he is, that he can't even admit that he destroyed his own life, to the point that not only does he scapegoat somebody else for it, but actually asks God himself to destroy the man that had the gall to expose him for the fake that he was. And then he finds out that this person who ruined his life is the same person as Spider-Man, whom he also has a passionate hatred for. And that should probably give you a pretty good idea of his mental state at that particular moment. Basically, he's at his lowest point. His life's ruined. He can't go any lower. And then what happens? He's suddenly bonded with a creature that gives him a massive high. Again, probably stronger than any real drug it can give a person. But it also goes much deeper than that, because the symbiote enhances all your negative traits, right? And Eddie has nothing but negative traits. So not only does he suddenly feel great, but within a matter of seconds, the symbiote corrupts him so thoroughly that he'll do anything without a second thought, especially because it's given him all of his enemies' powers. In essence, now he doesn't need God to kill him, because he'll gladly do it himself now that he has the means to, as well as the ultimate desire, thanks to the symbiote, to do it. But there's one other thing the symbiote gives him that most people don't consider. Power. The feeling of ultimate power. It's happened to some of the worst dictators and tyrants in history, and it happens to Eddie Brock at that moment. That feeling of total power, that you could do anything. It corrupts you in seconds, makes you abandon all your morals, and causes you to do anything you desire simply because you can get away with it. And it quickly gets to the point that you'll abuse that power and do evil things simply because you can, regardless of whether or not it actually serves a purpose. And that's why I've always loved his line, "I like being bad. It makes me happy." Because I know to many that makes him look like a guy who's just evil for the sake of it. But I feel that's exactly the point. That's what the symbiote has done to him. The point is, if there was any part of Eddie that was even remotely good, it was destroyed the moment he bonded with the symbiote. He was just way too much of a rotten person to stand a chance against something that feeds on your own negative nature, because that's all Eddie is, especially at the moment it found him. So what I'm getting at here is, Eddie goes from a self-pitying loser to feeling like a god in seconds, both because of the symbiote tie and from the feeling of complete and total power it's giving him. Suddenly, he feels he can do anything, and with the symbiote opening the floodgates to the awful person that was inside of him, that's exactly what he's going to do. But what he doesn't understand is, no mortal can truly obtain ultimate power, and those who think they can are destined to be destroyed by that very power, as those same dictators proved time and time again throughout history. But the point is, he loves the symbiote from the moment he bonds with it. Just look at the scene where he convinces the Sandman to team up with him to thoroughly ruin Spider-Man. He's having the time of his life. He has no reservations, no internal conflict or fighting back like Peter did. He's loving every moment of being bonded with the symbiote. And again, That's why I believe that "it makes me happy" line is so brilliant, because you can truly see it does. He loves being a bad person while under the symbiote's influence, and it might even make the high he gets off of it even stronger because he enjoys every aspect of it so much. Because it makes him feel like a god. He feels he can do anything he wants, that nobody can stop him, and anybody that tries to will pay. And he owes it all to the symbiote, and he knows it. To put it another way, Eddie Brock is a self-obsessed narcissist. He believes everything is about him, to the point that he believes he can even ask God to kill somebody that he's scapegoated for his own actions. And not only does the symbiote enhance those feelings, but it makes Eddie feel something he never had before: love for something other than himself. Because, as I just pointed out, he knows he owes everything he's feeling to the symbiote. And as a result, he loves it just as much as he loves himself, and would do anything to stay bonded with it. And you want proof of that? If you look closely, you can see that when the symbiote starts growing massive to get its revenge on Peter, he's smiling at it. That's right. He loves seeing that the thing he's been bonded to, that made him feel like a god, gave him seemingly all the power he ever wanted, and validated all of his twisted and messed up feelings, grow to such a massive and terrifying size, thus appearing to confirm everything that he thought about it. That it's the epitome of power, and as long as he's a part of it, he'll have those same powers. And then Peter pulls out the bomb. Now imagine what's going through his head at that moment. That this thing that came to him at his lowest moment and turned him into a god, gave him ultimate power, and probably the greatest high he had ever felt in his life, is about to be destroyed. In short, he feels that the symbiote is the only thing he has left. And not to mention, when you consider how drunk on power and the massive high it made him feel, to him, living without it and having to go back to being plain old Eddie Brock is nothing short of a fate worse than death for him. And that's why I've also always loved the way he screamed, "What are you doing?" as well. Because it just screams of absolute desperation. He'd do anything at that moment to save it from destruction. He refuses to live without it, both because he feels he's lost everything else and because it gave him everything he'd ever wanted. But that cry also betrays the fact that he's also helplessly addicted to the symbiote. Because again, he loved being bonded with it so much that the high it gave him was probably insane, which might even be part of the reason he seems almost giddy his entire time as Venom. So the point here is, to Eddie, the symbiote is everything, and he'd rather risk dying with it rather than being forced to live without it. That's right. He'd prefer dying than living without the thing that turned him into a horrible person and made him love every moment of it. And in the end, he gets exactly what he wants. This very power that corrupted him also led to his untimely death. Now, whether or not you agree with that analysis is up to you, but the point is that I could personally believe that he would do something so stupid to save something he'd only bonded to for a short time. Besides, if you look closely right before the bomb goes off, you can see him reaching for it, which indicates that he jumped into it intending on throwing it back out to save the symbiote. So it's not like he jumped in without a reason, even if it wasn't a very rational or well thought out one. But again, I do believe that he had come to love the symbiote and everything it gave him so much that he'd be willing to risk everything for it. And I do also feel that scene helps speak volumes about Peter Parker as well. Think about it. This man just told him to his face that he likes being bad and fatally stabbed his best friend as well. And yet, when he goes diving for the bomb, he doesn't hesitate for 1 second to try and save him. You have to admit, it's stuff like that shows it isn't actually his powers that make Spider-Man a hero. As well as maybe even foreshadow his forgiving Flint for his part in Uncle Ben's murder shortly thereafter, when you really think about it. So my point is, while still nowhere near the best movie in the trilogy, I do believe that Eddie Brock was actually a better written character than most people give Sam Raimi credit for. Now sure, it is not entirely accurate to his portrayal in the comics, or even remotely accurate, let's face it, but Raimi was always known for taking liberties with the source material. What I'm trying to say here is Brock symbolizes everything that Peter isn't, and I believe that his final moments only drive that point home. Because the symbiote may have made him feel like a god, but in the end, he's reduced to pathetically begging his mortal enemy to spare the abomination of nature before leaping to his death, absolutely terrified, determined to rebond with what he now sees as the better side of himself. In short, Brock sees the symbiote as the bringer of his perfect life, but in the end, the only thing it brought about was his own destruction. Alright, I think that's everything I wanted to say on that. So now I want to hear your thoughts. How well do you believe Eddie Brock was written in Spider-Man 3? And how believable do you think his death was? Please feel free to let me know in the comments. And as I said before, you don't have to agree with me on this video. You can feel any way about the character that you want to. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate all your support, and I hope to see you all next time.